What do you think the future of AI looks like?
Um, it's going to get very wild very quickly. Game theory is essentially a way to bring into mathematics the decision making process. I think that this civilization is over, period.
Noah Healy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here, Matt.
So, how have you used game theory in your business and just in day to day life in general to gain a competitive advantage?
Well, that's basically what game theory is for. Game theory is the mathematics of strategy, and so it allows you to take a new perspective on the situations that you face, and in my case, to uh, come up with a way to add a computer program to a commonly faced system that is financial markets that allows the operation of those markets to become radically more efficient than they presently are.
So, when you look at game theory as a whole, what is something that people get wrong when maybe they want to implement game theory into their own business, or what is a missing piece in game theory that people overlook?
I'd say the first thing is that, and I've said this many times, game theory is perhaps the most flippantly named thing in human history. People tend to conflate game theory with game design, and game design is not a useless endeavor. Uh, Things like basketball and Dungeons and Dragons and even gamification of work tasks can all be very valuable. But game theory is essentially a way to bring into mathematics the decision making process. And so, just as bringing physical descriptions of the universe into mathematics allowed us the tools that created modern engineering and modern manufacturing, bringing the process of decision making into mathematics and then using those same sorts of tools that we've developed from calculus to topology to programming allows us to build products in the space that we used to have occupied by just human decision makers. And just like you can't run as fast as your car can, you can't think as broadly as the systems that you can develop using game theory can.
So, what are the products and what is the particular space that you are in that you just hinted at?
So the space that I'm in is innovation in marketplaces. Uh, we really haven't seen all that much significant innovation in markets. We are using substantially the same marketplace design today that was used in the early Renaissance in pre-Italy. So Christopher Columbus, if he was taken to New York or London or Chicago or any of the other sort of major world centers and introduced to how things was going on, would certainly find the lights and the glitz confusing, but the structure of the marketplace would be identical to what he was used to. And the markets that he was used to were already close to 300 years old at the time of his voyage. So we're talking about a system with a great deal of inertia and a great deal of history, not a lot of modernization.
So, what kind of impact has it had, I guess, establishing that marketplace, and what is the impact you want it to have long term, next 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, the impact so far has been relatively minimal. There's a handful of projects scattered around the world that are trying to get off the ground incorporating the technology, and the U.S. Patent Office is tearing itself into knots not to grant the patent. I am currently suing them in federal court for violating their own procedures, lying repeatedly, and demonstrating that they're entirely incompetent. So we'll see what the judge says about that. But in terms of the impact I'd like it to have, commodities are the baseline of the human economy. Things like steel and oil and rice and wheat and beef and so on are traded through these commodity markets. Uh, on average, according to the US government figures, about 1 in 6 of the dollars that are spent on these products wind up getting absorbed by the marketplace. And also, the profit margins of the people that make these products, on average, are around 1 in 7 and or 1 in 8 dollars. So a consumer spends $48. Eight of those dollars wind up being absorbed before the money gets to the person that you're buying from. The $40 that gets to that person, they spend 35 of those dollars just staying in business. They get $5. You spend 48, they get 5, somebody else gets 8. If we took that number and just halved it, the producers go from, you know, $5 to $9 on that deal. That's an 80% improvement in how their business works. And like I said, that is the baseline and lifeblood of the economy. So we see a rapid global and grassroots expansion of human economic potential by just shrinking the share that the middleman takes.
So on paper, of course, this sounds appealing to different business owners and stuff, but why has this not come to fruition in a significant manner that has, taken storm over the US?
Well, setting up markets is very difficult. So customer acquisition isn't easy, but of much greater import is actually getting past the regulators to be even able to engage in normal customer facing activity. Recently, the state of Texas has decided to set up its own version of a Wall Street, for whatever reason. And they're now in operation. It cost them, the reports vary, but roughly $140 million in compliance costs, which is primarily legal fees. Um, if you wanted to open a coffee shop, you have to file a few things. Maybe you spend $1,000 on a lawyer just to make sure that all the paperwork's perfect, and you get a little advice while you're at it. Maybe you only, go on LegalZoom and you pay $20. That's not the way this works. You have to have a significant amount of money. So what I'm doing is actually licensing the technology, and in order to license it for sort of for real and not just handshakes and open source, I would have to have the patent. And the patent I applied in 2016. It's 2024. They've accepted twice, and on both occasions, they've found ways not to accept their own acceptances. Um, the first was a voicemail they left with my attorney, which is not the legal procedure that they're authorized to use. And then a little over a year later, after they'd been forced to accept it a second time, they just rejected it in the ordinary way, but for fairly extraordinary reasons. Um, so so in order to have a product to sell, I need the federal government to do their legally mandated job. And it is very difficult to get that to happen.
Interesting. So what is the role that game theory has in establishing the economic market you want to have? And with that, what kind of role does AI have, if any yet, or what kind of role do you want it to have?
Well, one thing to bear in mind is that markets used to be an example of artificial intelligence. Markets used to behave in a super intelligent fashion. I am not convinced that that is true anymore because the mechanism that allowed the market to aggregate and draw together the intelligence of various people has been largely destroyed by the internet, effectively. The the wide scale communication and actually AI itself being plugged into the markets, which is something we've been doing for decades now, uh, actually degrades the market's ability to outperform human behavior. And that's, I would say, the primary reason we see for global and regional scale economic dislocation over the last few decades. It's not like there have never been economic crises in all of human history, but for the majority of people who have lived with these markets, again, in the last 800 years, major economic crises are effectively a once in a lifetime event. Now, most of those people get to experience one of those events, but it's generally about once per lifetime. For people born in the year 2000, being as generous to the financial system as you could possibly be, they're on about their fifth. Um, so, so obviously things have gotten a little bit crazy, and that that's a that issue is all based on the issue of effectively the game theory of the markets being broken by a more powerful network coming into place. Um, my general approach that I've found within game theory, I believe, has a lot of potential applications in the AI space. In this specific case, it's potentially creating markets that are once again super intelligent. But what my approach with negotiation games allows you to do is actually design an alignment system. And the way modern AI functions is effectively it learns how to adapt to the constraints and rewards that are being provided. And so if you can develop a negotiation game around your problem space, you'll be able to use current AI technology to create high intelligence agents very rapidly.
Can you explain the negotiation games a little more and maybe an example of it?
Absolutely, yes. So, um, game theory, because strategy itself is so varied, is also a varied discipline. And the first big divide is between what's known as zero sum and non zero sum games. So, zero sum is the kinds of games people are generally used to: chess, tic tac toe, boxing, uh, whatever. It's a game where your victory is somebody else's loss. Um, Draws can be possible, but a draw is a draw. Um, both sides win, both sides lose, that kind of thing. Um, Non-zero sum games are ones in which the rewards can are not balanced. Your reward doesn't come from my loss, your and so on. So a non-zero sum game could be one in which we can both lose. It can also be one in which we both win. Um, One of the things as we get into more and more real situations, there's always some more non-zero summage happening. So professional sports leagues, for example, the teams want to win. They have a win-loss. They're trying to get to the championship. They'll have, rewards that are based on that. But the league isn't a zero sum. It wants a product that people are interested in watching. It wants competitive games, hyped up fans, all that kind of thing. And so in the extreme, you see something like professional wrestling, where there isn't necessarily, or at least the thing happening in the ring isn't a real competition. It's actually a cooperative event. That only has a competitive thing in the sort of behind the scenes action of gaining fame or whatever for what you're doing. Um, so within the space of non-zero sum games, there are games called coordination games. A coordination game is one where everybody wins by agreeing. Um, to some extent. It's one specifically where disagreeing harms the disagreeer. And the my classic example is, what side of the street do you drive on? Uh, we all win when we all drive on the same side of the street, right or left. And if you decide not to drive on the same side of the street as everybody else, yeah, you're probably going to cause some other people to have some problems, but you're definitely going to cause yourself to have some problems. Um, and so that becomes a set of strategic situations that's a very good place for consensus. It's once you get to a space where everybody deviating is hurting themselves, you get very few deviations. It's a very bad space for innovation because once you get to a place where anybody deviating hurts themselves, nobody deviates anymore. So negotiation games are a way to bring innovation to the stability of the coordination game. You essentially create a new actor that effectively has to be a machine, uh, that that what it does is it basically sends out signals to everybody and says, "Hey, this is the new consensus." And then that actor can be affected by the players. So rather than just going out and driving on the other side of the street one day and seeing how that works out, you would effectively convince that actor to tell everybody to drive on the other side of the street. And then it would sort of get everybody to switch. And then we would measure, it would then measure sort of how good the switch was. And if the switch actually benefited everybody, then the profits from that would filter back to the original. And so imagine a situation where you've become convinced that driving on the other side of the street, instead of driving on the right hand side, we should all drive on the left hand side. So you figure out how much money it would cost to pay everybody to switch, and you give that actor that amount of money, and it pays everybody that amount of money. But then you turn out to be correct, and everybody's, like insurance premiums drop through the floor because it turns out you don't have accidents when you drive on the left-hand side of the street, say. Um, well, now they all saved a bunch of money. And so the actor comes back around and says, "You remember when I gave you all that money to drive on the left-hand side of the street, and now you've saved even more money than that on car insurance. We're gonna collect some of that money and gather it all up and give it to the guy that told us that we had to drive on the other side of the street." Um, that's a bit contrived, but in marketplaces, basically there's these deals, and in current markets, deals exist in a sort of ephemeral state where they're halves. There's an offer to buy, there's an offer to sell, and when those two halves sort of join up, then they turn into a deal and the market creates it. I've created a way to rip that contract not into two pieces but into three pieces. So there's a price, an offer to trade trade goods at that price, and an offer to trade money at that price. And so in this scenario, when those three things come together, then the deal happens. But the trick is that while trading goods and trading money are individual behaviors, price is a market function. And so the market actually only needs one price for everybody to trade in a commodity scenario where there's thousands of corn farms or, tens of thousands of factories or something. And so that creates a much more efficient mechanism of discovering price versus the current system, which has dozens and dozens of trades happening among people that don't really have product or money, but are just trying to chase prices down.
So what role does, I guess, demand play if that were to come to fruition in a way where supply could be limited in a way? And with that, why is the role of the third party so crucial in your opinion?
Well, so balancing supply and demand is the task of the marketplace. There is a price at which supply and demand will balance. There might be more than one, but there is at least one. Um, and that is effectively the fundamental insight of market economics. And so supply and demand are real properties of the actual physical universe. Supply comes from people doing work and having businesses and coming up with these products. Demand comes from, people getting hungry, requiring energy, or having whims or whatever. Uh, and so there's a price that will balance these things. When you go into the grocery store, the produce section, whatever, everything's got a price on it. The grocery store would like those prices to be at a level where when they put stuff out, people buy it. If they price the apples at, $40 a pound, then the apples are going to rot before they get sold. If they price the bacon at a nickel a pound, then they're not going to have any bacon for very long because the first guy that sees this that likes bacon is just going to scoop all the bacon into his basket and go, store it because bacon stores well. Um, so there's a price where they can make the most money they can and still sell everything they've got. And it is the task of a marketplace to find the price at which you can sell everything you can make for the most money you can get. And that's the task of price discovery.
Yeah, that's interesting. What is the role that different currencies have in this? Because, not all currencies are created equal.
Yes. So a currency is essentially a political money. And money is the unit of measurement that we use for prices. Um, So just like in America we use feet, whereas in most other countries they use meters. Um, those are units of measurement. They have nothing to do with anything else. If somebody is 6 feet tall, or I think approximately 180 centimeters, they're not a different height. We're just using different units to describe the same height. Uh, Similarly, if you have a dollar in one currency and a, you know, 40 foo in some made up currency, you're not describing different levels of value, you're describing the same level of value in different measurements. Unfortunately, because currencies are political monies, the political systems that are attached to those currencies can have a lot to say about things. And most political systems are attached to having inflating currencies, which means that when we're comparing prices over time, that doesn't really work out very well. Anybody that's watched movies from the last century will note that on the occasions when people talk about prices, uh, if those people are in black and white or sort of garish color or sort of slick neon, the prices they're talking about will all be very, very different from each other. And that's because the U.S. government is one of those, almost all in on inflation.
So, in they got a word. It's not implying a just a one world currency then, like crypto, where that would be implemented in a mass scale to not pump up, but to sustain that marketplace that you are looking for.
Not really, no. So a market is necessarily indifferent. So just like if I were to create a ruler, say about a meter long, I could mark that off in inches and get a yard and maybe a yard and some change, or I could mark it off in centimeters and get a meter or maybe a little less than a meter, depending on how long I wanted this thing to be. And if I did my job correctly and built it out of materials that were straight and strong enough to remain straight and not particularly thermal expansive over the space of places that they would wind up, and I'd made the marks with, good quality inks that didn't fade and were all in the right place, it would be a good ruler. So a marketplace can be a good marketplace. Now, the centimeter and the inch are both very standard units of measurement. In fact, inches are actually defined in terms of centimeters. So they're really the same measurement. They just have different funny, words that we use to describe them. But the currencies that we use are more like if you had if you had a definition of a unit of length that was, you know, just a whim. Every few minutes you had to call somebody up and ask them how long your unit of length was. The markets could still function under those circumstances if they were still sort of good rulers and made out of that kind of stuff. Sadly, the existing markets are essentially made out of silly putty. So you've got a situation where you've got this kind of floppy amorphous blob and arguments about what the value of the underlying thing is. My markets are a lot more like actual rulers, and one of the effects of that right now, because the market itself isn't particularly self-consistent, uh, when a when when a polity inflates its currency, they can blame the markets for what's happening, and at least sometimes they'll be correct. And so you can have this situation where there isn't a standard to hold people to. Now, the crypto people, and particularly the sort of one world currency crypto people, feel that they can create a standard currency and that will hold the markets to account. I think that that is almost perfectly wrong, because the difficulty with the markets isn't so much that the currencies are in constant flux, it's that they're being overwhelmed by the situation of having the amount of information that's involved in the internet being plugged into them. And so I believe that firming up the marketplaces is much more likely to impose discipline in currency than imposing discipline in currency is likely to firm up marketplaces. Also, because currency is primarily a political matter, the crypto people do not currently have a functioning plan for how they're going to become politically dominant globally, and that that's what you would need to have in order to win a political argument. Whereas intra-market competition has a strong history of becoming globally dominant, thanks to something called Gresham's law. Effectively, if you can create a situation where individuals can make a low-cost choice to improve their situation, they will all choose to do that. And so you can get widespread independent decision makers to flip over how their society functions. This Gresham's law is actually in the context of currencies, but we see a similar thing happen. The discovery of this marketplace design that we currently use in the early Renaissance actually went on to take over the world because it actually does work better than all the kinds of markets that had existed prior to it.
Interesting. So, what do you think the future of AI looks like?
Um, it's going to get very wild very quickly. So we've already seen some incredible breakthroughs in reinforcement learning superintelligence. Uh, I believe that we've just given out a chemistry Nobel effectively to an artificial intelligence. We gave it to the team, but frankly, they don't understand what was done, and neither do any of the rest of us. So, one of the holy grails in biology has been protein folding, and using the our present understanding of chemistry and the computational techniques that we have from physics, this problem was really completely unsolvable, totally intractable, radically more difficult than chess or Go or Stratego or any of the games that have fallen to our various AIs. About a year and a half ago, I think, maybe two at this point, uh, Google actually won a protein folding competition. Since then, there's been several more protein folding systems and improvements in that one. And recently, within the last 6 months or so, uh, the protein folding team from Google had actually reversed it and protein folding was the holy grail, the sort of true pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, way past like the actual gates of heaven, was a reverse protein fold where you could describe a physical shape that you wanted a nano machine to have and get back an amino acid sequence that would have that shape. And they developed a protein that depolymerizes plastics, and and wrote a paper about it. I just recently saw a news broadcast that was rather hyperbolic. It's unclear whether that broadcast is just somebody finally noticed that we'd made the most seminal breakthrough in biological science in human history, or whether or not they'd actually built the artificial protein into a system and demonstrated that it worked. But that's highly impressive. On the other side, generative AI is rapidly changing our relationships to one another and culture. I saw something recently. There are actually a fair number of human beings that manage to support themselves by writing self-published short stories and novellas and so on Amazon. Uh, Amazon has recently changed their rules for people doing this. Excuse me, limiting people to uploading 3 new books a day. Now, humans don't actually write a book in a third of a day, but AIs do. And AIs can write vastly more than that. I was just got a an email from a network of podcasts that I've been on a couple times. Uh, they just dropped a new thing where in the last 24 hours they created 38 podcasts.
That is not that seems impossible.
Right. Yes. I had an experience a few weeks ago. Um, Google has created a product they're calling Notebook LM that exploits their Gemini system, and it lets you take a selection of files that you have, and it will automatically generate things like study guides and timelines and other things that might help you understand what's going on. But one of the things it does is it will create an completely AI generated conversation between a male voice and a female voice, explaining in sort of reverent terms whatever it is that exists within the context of the the things that you've uploaded. So I have quite a few actually, uh, pieces of written content around my system. I took 3 of them, one of which is just a diagram, and dropped them into Notebook ML and got out a just about 15-minute conversation. I then plugged that into another system to turn it into a video that has a sort of running closed captioning, and uploaded that video to YouTube.
So with all of that, that clearly AI can be taken in a very bad way, whether it's mass producing content, books, whatever that looks like. So do you think the next decade is AI going to have an overall net positive or net negative impact on the civilization, really?
I think that this civilization is over, period. I don't think that there's absolutely any way to think about the continuation of the civilization that people generally regard as currently existing, which is wrong. It doesn't exist. Um, because AI didn't just start, this week or last year or a few years ago when OpenAI sort of got big. Um, we've been plugging the kinds of AI systems that OpenAI made very, very famous into our markets since the aughts. And we've been plugging less sophisticated AI systems into our markets for about half a century now. Uh, we've also been increasing AI intermediations in terms of uh, recordings and other kinds of content management into our systems again for decades. Uh, our societies have not been designed to function without it being people making all of the key decisions and communications. And I was just talking about this last week. Our ethical systems are largely based on people having conversations with each other and personal reactions to situations that they encounter. Um, and that's certainly had some very seriously bad outcomes in human history. But in general, that's all there's ever been because that's all there ever could have been. But we now have a situation where many people interact frequently and habitually with things that aren't human beings. And recently, measures of the mental health of today's youth, uh, which have been in decline for again the better part of a century, flipped over into absolute apocalypse zone. The U.S. government has been maintaining a longitudinal study of a cross section of American citizens for, I think, like 80 or 90 years now, and the most recently inducted cohort of teenagers, uh, more than half of them were in the bottom two zones of mental health, and that's like frequent thoughts of suicidal ideation. So what civilization are you talking about, basically? One where children think that they're supposed to kill themselves. That's not a civilization. In my view, this civilization ended close-ish to a century plus ago when we discovered for absolutely certain that our conceptions of matter, energy, time, space, math, and reason were wrong. So between Max Planck, Albert Einstein, uh, Turing, and a lot of other people whose names are not as famous as theirs, uh, we discovered that our picture of how the physical universe actually functions and how our thoughts and imagination actually function had actually been fundamentally wrong for all of human history. Uh, and we identify the beginning of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution with things like Newton's reconception of Aristotelian models of the universe and the discovery that you're wrong about everything. We also identify that in other ways with the breakdown of previous civilizations where, God kings, when a disaster happens that's not supposed to happen, if you're actually God and everything collapses, that's a frequent motif through the rise and fall of various feudal dynasties of China, for example. Um, we should not expect a civilization to survive the the destruction of its foundations, and our foundations were destroyed before the First World War. And we've been doing more work destroying them since then. And we're going to do a lot more because computers are real. They're potentially really useful, but we're going to need new civilizational institutions in order to exploit them.
So when you say this civilization is over, practically, what exactly does that look like? Because obviously that is a not a popular opinion among people.
Well, practically, I'd mentioned that somebody born a quarter of a century ago has seen more major financial disasters than anyone who's lived any length of time that was born in any of the 7 centuries preceding that. Uh, the economic destabilizations and dislocations that we're seeing are real. result from our markets not being capable of functioning in the environment of the technology that we have. And because what's breaking them is that technology, as we improve the pervasiveness and capability of those technologies, the markets will work worse and worse, and we will lose more and more capacity to have an economy. And we live on that economy, and that will kill a lot of us if we get to wherever that breaking point is. Uh, Politics again. Um, the political systems around constitutional republics and democracies that are prevalent here in the modern world are based on systems of humans physically occupying common space and having conversations with one another. We have Twitter now, and Facebook and Google and everything else, and you can once again see political systems not only inside countries but across countries becoming radically less viable. Things like diplomatic negotiations, which historically have never really been all that good, but at least were capable of maintaining privacy. The those the people operating those systems were not crypto bros, and they're not crypto bros now. And so the operational security required to maintain secret, stable, secure negotiations between sovereign nations, which we've carefully worked out over 6,000 years of human history, presuppose the ability to write a message down and put it in a box and not have it read. That ship sailed. We don't live in that world, and so we are seeing enormous amounts of diplomatic correspondence becoming public property, and that system can't function under those circumstances. And again, that's going to get worse. We've seen coups and on nearly every continent, North, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. We've seen conflicts coming up in every one of those places. That's all going to keep happening because the mechanisms that had been in place that allowed sovereign nations to deal with each other peacefully depend on the kinds of secrecy that the existence of the internet makes unviable for people who aren't basically the smartest mathematical cryptographer on earth. And most of us aren't that person. I certainly am not.
So, to summarize it, you would say technology is innovating, of course, daily. The markets aren't. So then it's going to have a negative impact economically, continue to have a negative impact economically significantly over time, and it's only going to continue to spiral out of control if there's not some sort of innovation in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I tend to call this Niven's principle. So Larry Niven, I think he's actually still alive. I certainly hope he is. He's a very good writer, or at least a pretty good one. He's a Silver Age science fiction, hard sci-fi guy. He's sort of more famous for his collaborations than his own stuff, but Ringworld, I think, got a little bit of play. He is the inventor of the concept of the Ringworld. So at any rate, one of Niven's mots that shows up in his work here and there is that ethics is downstream of technology. And we usually don't think about it that way. A very common phrase is that technology is neither good or bad. People are good or bad, and it's what we do with it. But in fact, technology is an enablement. So whether or not something is good or bad is dependent on whether or not it's possible. That which is impossible can't be good or evil. It's impossible. But technology transfers things from the realm of impossibility to the realm of possibility. And when it does that, it now becomes an ethical question. Should that thing that is now possible be done, or shouldn't it be done? And so ethics needs to get off its butt and start doing the real work of digging into what it means for information and entropy to be the same thing, and what what it means for systems to be able to do anything that they're told, which those are foundational to the building and structuring of computers, for example. Uh, and none of our existing legal or religious or cultural systems are based on those things being true. And we're doing a lot of things that are very obviously harming us. Another one I like is people think about the dangers of AI in terms of things like the Terminator. Um, it's more like table saws are dangerous. If you don't know how to behave around heavy equipment and you're around operating heavy equipment, you're pretty likely to wind up severely hurting yourself. Um, well, the internet isn't just a factory floor that's, behind some walls, that's behind a fence, that's over there. It's in every one of our homes. It's vastly more powerful than any steel mill that's ever been created. And we're plugging our kids into this thing. And they don't understand it because we don't understand it. And what we're seeing is the mental health of the human species falling off a cliff. Um, I recently heard an insane stat that around 130 million Americans were illiterate, just unable to read at the level that would allow you to read a story to your children, for example. Um, that's an insane figure, but the internet will tell you things, and there are entire successful YouTube channels that function by effectively opening up a newspaper and reading the article word for word with a few asides and jokes and so on to hundreds of thousands of people. Um, that's an insane position to exist in a society that depends on technology that you can't understand without reading things.
That's definitely an interesting perspective on AI, the futures, the positives, the negatives, who should be working with AI because of the negative impact it can have on society as a whole, and also the internet, the impact that it's having just on everyone really, and how it's really taken over a lot of our lives without us even realizing it, without us even acknowledging it. So with that, Noah, where can the listeners find you at?
Well, on the internet, as it happens. The easiest way to contact me is through email, noahphealy@yahoo.com. I read that pretty frequently. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Noah Healy there. I've got a website explaining my marketplace at chorddiz.com. You can download a white paper there. As I'd mentioned, there's a YouTube channel. My YouTube handle is Nikki Hefflinger, and there's a couple of explanatory videos there. Uh, and you can just, search for me. One intriguing thing, I've been doing this for long enough, and since I decided to use a term that nobody else had ever used before, coordinated discovery markets, if you ask any of the generative AI systems that I've been able to test, what a coordinated discovery market is, they'll tell you. Their their explanations aren't really perfect, but and they might need a little bit of wiggle prompt because they might go a little off the rails one way or another. But since I created that term and I've been talking about it for a decade now, the AI also knows that that's what that means, and so you can find out in the comfort of your own living room uh, if you're into that kind of thing.
Awesome. Noah, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me again. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.